Just like Abraham, the Lord made me a promise. Yeah, it didn't seem like that it would ever come true. I kept believing, I kept trusting, I kept obeying his voice, because I knew what he promised me that he was able to do. And you know what? And then it finally happened.
Miss Norma Jackson,
Yes,
how
sir.
are you?
I am doing well, sir. How are you?
I am super fine
Well,
for an
good.
old fella.
Good, good.
Look here, I interviewed you about 10 years ago on this very
You
couch.
sure did. You sure did.
And you told me something that seemed to be proving itself to be the truth. You told me that black people had been and was being prepared by God to be able to do what needed to be done for the long-term future. Do you still believe that?
I absolutely do. In fact, I believe it more intensely now than I did then. One of the things that I know and that science and history and all of those things have shown us is that we are the parent race on this planet. We were the first people. We have inhabited every continent. If you go and you dig deep enough, you'll find that there's an African presence or a presence of black people there prior to any other people. With that comes a level of responsibility, and I think that we are at a juncture in history now where the planet itself is being destroyed by those who don't understand the relationship between people and nature and people and Mother Earth and what's happening with, let's just even take the bees for example. The bee population is being just wiped out by pesticides and monarch butterflies. I mean, just so many things that are critical. The bee population is critical to our survival as humans. So when you have a culture of people, and I call them the babies of the planet because if you look chronologically, Europeans were the last ones to show up on the planet. So I call them the babies of the planet. And they are, for whatever reason, driven by greed, and they seem to not have a clear understanding of the relationship between people and everything else that God created. And so there is now this urgency. You know, you talk about climate change and those kinds of things. I think if you look back in history and you look at what we have done in the past, for example, here in Tuskegee when the South was being devastated by the boll weevil, it was a black man, George Washington Carver, that came up with ways to solve that dilemma. And so instinctively it seems that black people have come up with solutions to problems that have been created by other folk. And a lot of it is by necessity because we've had to in order to survive. So yes, I remember that conversation. In fact, that conversation happened shortly after I had come back from Ghana, West Africa.
Right, right. It certainly did. Now, you know, I can understand that we don't have to rehash here what we experienced, how we were dumbed down, misused and abused, how we were ripped of culture and all of that. But now, through all of that, we still made it. To what do you attribute that kind of true grit to within black people, other than what God intended probably from the start?
There is a resilience about us that no matter how they try to wipe us out, we just keep coming back. 2 days ago was Bob Marley's birthday, and I was listening to one of his albums as we drove over to Atlanta yesterday. One of the lyrics in one of those songs says, "By the powers of the Most High, we keep on surfacing." there's absolutely nothing they can do that will take us out. There's nothing that can be done to black people that will exterminate us from this planet. On the other hand, there was a black psychologist, passed away several years ago, Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing,
Right.
who had a theory about why white people tend to do some of the things that they do in terms of just the you know, you asked a question several years ago, why are they so mean? Mm-hmm. Underneath all of that is fear. And Dr. Francis Cress Welsing's theory was that it was fear of genetic annihilation. And what that means is that we have dominant genes. Black people can give birth to whatever everybody else came from us. On the other hand, white people have recessive genes, and that's why all of this craziness, the miscegenation laws, and all of this madness around, you know, race mixing was so terrifying to them, because they realize that if they mate with anybody else on the planet, they no longer exist. If they do it over a period of time, they will cease to exist.
Okay, now look. There was kidnapping, mm-hmm. slavery, and there was then emancipation. Mm-hmm. And when they turned those black people loose, people like Smalls, mm-hmm. Queen Mother's uncle, mm-hmm. and all those other powerful black people, mm-hmm. they went to Congress and Senate and just exploded.
Yep.
And then the system brought in, mm-hmm. After Reconstruction, the system brought in Jim Crow laws, mm-hmm. they brought in the KKK, mm-hmm. and they brought in all of that. Now, they got us that time because mm-hmm. we wasn't as intelligent as we are now. Our forefathers didn't have the high-tech news reports and everything mm-hmm. to be able to grow fast on how to counter what the man mm-hmm. was doing. And now I'm looking at now, history just simply repeating itself.
Absolutely.
So how do you see that, and where do you see us now as being able to survive and slip from under that foot of oppression mm-hmm. like our great-grandfathers and mothers did?
That's an interesting question that you just posed. I think one of the things, I remember in 2016, sitting, my husband and I, was around our anniversary time, so we were down in Gulf Shores watching the returns from the 2016 election. And I remember my oldest granddaughter had just gotten a phone, and she was consistently texting me during the night, "Mommy, another state just turned red." She was watching the maps as the returns came in, and I was feeling so, I didn't really know what to say to her. And as we were, you know, finally went to bed, and of course we know what the results were, and it, you know, it occurred to me that we are a people who do not practice. There's a West African concept called Sankofa, which means in order to move forward effectively, you've got to be able to look back and see where you've come from.
Absolutely.
If we had been good students of history, we would have expected that to happen in 2016. Because when Barack Obama was elected in 2008, immediately after that, certain pockets of white people lost their minds. It was as if Judgment Day had come and the sky had fallen, and it was just too much to see a black man in that seat of power. So it describes to me what you were talking about, like right after slavery and then Reconstruction, the rise of the Klan, the rise of, you know, laws and Jim Crow laws and black codes and all of that. If we had been good students of history, when he was elected in 2008, we would have been preparing for the inevitable.
Absolutely.
And we haven't, we don't do that well. So your question now is, where do we go from here? Because I think right now we're in a really critical time. I don't know if people have paid a whole lot of attention to what happened this past week, but we are going to find ourselves, I just want you to imagine if a Barr had been the Attorney General when Queen Mother and those other people were in Selma.
Absolutely.
And Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy made the decision to federalize those troops and to send the National Guard to protect them. Had you had a Barr, William Barr, sitting in that seat, or a Jefferson Beauregard Session, or somebody of that caliber, what would have happened to them? There would not have been that protection there, and I don't think
the same thing would have happened to him that happened to Queen Mother when she
on
was
Bloody
beat down
Sunday.
by the
same thing would have happened. We might not have ever gotten the Voting Rights Act passed.
True.
None of that may have happened, but you had some people of relative goodwill in some places. Right now, we don't have that. We have got a Justice Department that has declared that you can't even investigate anybody without coming through me now.
So we better start Sankofa now, right?
We better start looking at what has happened, and the first thing we need to be thinking about is our survival. Food security, you know, how we're going to protect our community. Should we need to protect our community? Because I don't think we really realize what kind of predicament we're in right now.
Yeah, too many of our people really don't. So now, how do we get to our people the message that, and to say it in just a plain old street fashion way, you better wake up and smell the coffee. But if you go a little bit more intellectual, you say, you better get yourselves educated and refined and rejuvenated and totally committed to just seeing things as they are and not just looking at things in a one-dimensional fashion, but just looking at everything that confronts you in a three-dimensional fashion so that you have a broad perspective of what's happening. How do we get that message to our people?
To the masses of our people, Chief, we find ourselves in a strange place. You alluded to the fact that we were better off maybe because we have access to technology and we can find out things in a heartbeat and whatever. But something happened to our people post-integration that I don't think we've studied quite deeply enough. Once, I call it desegregation, integration, desegregation, whatever you want to, however you want to term that. Prior to that, we had communities that were intact for the most part because we had to be.
Absolutely.
We had our own stores. We had our own. We were mostly self-contained in these black communities, right? We had a family structure where you had, for the most part, intact families. They may have been dysfunctional, but they were intact. You had a village concept where people in the community looked out for each other, looked out for everybody's children.
Absolutely.
Once integration happened, there was a breakdown. You know, we could go to wherever now, so we did. You know, the communities broke down. You had other things happening during the 60s. You know, the rise of public housing where they said the father couldn't be in the home. You know, so that was intentional. You had that. Then you had the continual breakdown of the family. You had the beginning of mass incarceration under the president that we just love so much, Bill Clinton, in his era, the 3 strikes laws and all of that further dismantled the family. And you had something else that happened, and I keep asking people to look at how this happened. The crack cocaine epidemic in the black community decimated families and communities.
Absolutely.
And I don't think we've taken a good look at how that actually happened. And that, too, was by design. You know, I heard, I think I may have mentioned it to you, a white minister say, and this was back during the time, the same period of time when Marvin Gaye was killed. I don't know what year, I can't remember the year right off the top of my head. But this white minister said on a radio show I was listening to that he had seen crack cocaine do what 300 years of slavery could not do.
Yeah, I remember
and that was to make poor mothers out of black women.
Yeah.
Now, when you think about that, that is really, really something.
Oh, yeah. And that was true, too, because during that 1960s period, in early 1970s, I was, law enforcement up in Ohio, and I had always talked during lectures and everything about how if a black mother was out, just drunk off of liquor, she'd get up out of a stupor and claw you if you try to mess with her children.
That's right.
But by the same token, I saw women take their children to the crack house, leave them set outside while they go in and engage in crack activity. And I had never seen that before in my life.
It was unheard of, and I don't think we've looked at the toll that took on our communities.
Absolutely.
So sometimes I get a little frustrated when I hear people saying, well, the parents need to da-da-da. But if you had 3 generations of parents that have been impacted by that, who are you looking for to do what?
Absolutely.
But then by the same token, look at how the powers that be is treating the opioid crisis.
Oh yeah.
In comparison to that.
Absolutely.
So all I can do is quote Neely Fuller, who said, and this quote Omar Neal introduced to me several years ago, and I use it all the time: unless you understand racism, everything you think you know will only confuse you.
Well, that's an absolute good statement.
Absolutely.
But that's true.
Because there's nothing else to explain the difference between how one is a public health crisis and you get all this, they've got camps set up for the children of opioid, and that's good. But suppose black people during the crack epidemic had access to those same kinds of things instead of locking folk up,
right?
Creating this mass incarceration system, and just so we have just got problems upon problems upon problems. But I think that we are up to the challenge if we do just what you're doing now, sitting down, talking about what has happened, and trying to look for viable solutions in individual communities, because what works here may not work in another community, but each community needs to sit down and begin to have these kinds of discussions so that they can see what is it that we need to do in our community to educate our people about what's coming down the pipe.
And we need to be honest about it. I notice women have girls involved in all kinds of activities throughout this community, and I believe other communities too. And these girls are being raised, and not all girls of course, but most of them are being raised to be women, when we are allowing our boys to lag around over here and be cool and drop out and all that other kind of stuff. So what are these women going to do when they are ready to hook up with what would be a male counterpart? How are we going to fix that situation from your perspective?
That's a really good question. I'm a grandmother of 9 girls, so
ooh, you do have a heap of them.
I have 9 granddaughters, so that question is personal for me. And I don't have a ready-made answer, but what I do know is that, like I said, it may just mean that you don't get to do it as a collective, but I know that you have done it on an individual basis with young men. And if each one could just grab one, that would be a start. But one of the things that I think needs to be reintroduced to the black community are formal rites of passage programs. In indigenous societies, and African societies in particular that I'm familiar with, there were these rites of passage programs that young people went through, so that a man could teach boys how to be men and a woman could teach girls how to be women. And that wasn't left up to happenstance. They weren't just left out there to try to figure it out. For the last 14 years I've worked at a youth facility, and when I tell you that we missed the mark in so many ways, in terms of what our children need in order to have that kind of inner core of strength, resilience. There are a lot of things I think that we as a community could be doing that we aren't doing. And I even, I include myself in that. I used to have a very viable youth group in the community, 21st Century Youth Leadership Group.
Yeah, you guys made a lot of difference.
We were really an influence for a lot of young people. It just seems as if now it's hard for me to, I guess because I'm older and the children, I don't have the connection with the children that I used to have.
And you don't have the push from the parents to push them out there to you.
That's true. And
so
because I have tried, and
yeah.
I still think that is one of my post-retirement objectives, is to get that organization in this community back up and running. Several of those young people are doing extremely well. I'll just lift two, for example. April Cadell is, that's my child. Mrs. Margaret Cadell, that's our child. But she's doing extremely well. She's working on her PhD. It's just been an amazing activist, community leader. Still is one of the few people in the national 21st century realm that comes back and gives back to other young people every year at camps.
Beautiful.
Another young man.
So you guys still have that 21st century camp?
We still have the camp. It's not as large as by a long shot as it used to be. Okay. We have about 3 really active chapters in the state now, whereas we used to have in every black belt county we had a chapter, and then we had chapters around the country. But I think one of the things that has happened is we, for whatever reason, must not have built in a mechanism to keep the alumni coming back and giving back, because you can't expect 60, 70-year-old folk to do what they used to do when they were 30, 40.
Absolutely.
Just want to lift up another young man from Tuskegee who's in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He's a pastor now, doing some amazing work, and that's Robert Turner Jr. He served as president of the Amala chapter.
I praise that rascal every time I see it on Facebook.
Absolutely. So
I know that I love it.
I am committed to restarting 21st Century because I think it's important. One of the things that it does is it immerses our children in their history and culture, and that's imperative. Dr. Marimba Ani, who is a student of Dr. John Henry Clark, who was an amazing scholar, and I mean just one of the brightest minds of the 20th century.
Absolutely.
But Mama Marimba, in one of her seminal works, Yorugu, talks about culture and the importance of culture. And when she said this in a meeting that I was in, it hit me like a ton of bricks because it's so critical. She says that culture is to a people what the immune system is to the human body. The immune system is what protects you. It's what keeps those outside forces from taking over your body. It does so much for you. And our culture is that for us.
Absolutely.
And we have had a total disruption and breakdown in our culture.
Right. I tell you something else we've had a breakdown in. And I'm not just talking about us. I'm talking about everybody in this nation, it appears. Whatever happened to truth?
Alternative facts.
Oh, is that what
I mean, there is. I just don't know. I don't know.
And one of the things I want black parents to begin to understand, you got to tell the truth. You know, little lies are picked up by your children.
Absolutely.
Say like somebody knock on the door or ring the doorbell. And, you tell your child to go tell them that you're not home.
Right.
You are planting in your child's head that it's okay to lie.
There you go.
And I don't understand that. What do we do to try to get us to consider doing something differently and just being honest? Because the way I look at it, somebody asks me something, if I don't want to tell them, I just don't say nothing.
Okay.
Or I say, well, I'm not going to get involved in that.
Right.
But I don't go just arbitrarily tell them a lie.
I know.
Just to get rid of them.
Right.
Because if it goes around and comes back around, here I am faced with the lie that I told, trying to fix it.
Then you got to remember what lie you told. It's just too much. So it's just easier to tell the truth. But that's something that is becoming a lost art.
Integrity.
Integrity out of the window. When we look at a generation who has grown up, say a child was 10 in 2016, you've had 3 years of the leader of this country and of the free world. I've lost track of how many lives they have already tabulated.
Of around 16,000.
So, in the thousands. So what is that teaching a whole generation of young people? Like this, where we are right now, it's going to take decades to recover from this last 3 years. And this has been something, I mean, when you have, like I say, his spokesperson saying, well, he just gave alternative facts. What is an alternative fact but a lie? It's a lie. You know, and so you've legitimized, you've normalized this now for 3 years on a national stage. And you've got children. What do you tell your children? What do you tell them when you've got the President of the United States who is, every time he opens his mouth and makes 2 sentences, one of the sentences is a lie?
Yeah.
So integrity, there is none, because all of the things that we know he said before he was elected, and the people knew he said them because it was on tape, regarding women, regarding making statements like I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. Yeah. Those kinds of things we knew as a nation before he was elected.
That's right.
So, I mean, I don't know how we bounce back from this level of indecency and immorality and just corruption. I don't know how we bounce back, but I do know that there is an agenda larger than the one that we see with our eyes, because he's being allowed to do this for some reason.
Absolutely. Now, I want you to answer me yes or no first.
Oh, okay.
You got a whole bunch of grandchildren.
I do.
Do you curse them out when they do something that they should not do?
Absolutely not.
Do you curse and use all that bad language in their presence?
Absolutely not.
Do you slap them and abuse them when they make a mistake as a child, when they are 3 and 4 and 5 and their minds have only developed up to a point?
Absolutely not.
Well then, what in the world do we do to help black people? And I know we're suffering. I know that we've missed out on a lot. I know that we've been dumbed down. But how do we recruit from this dumbed down state that make us not sense the psychological harm we're doing to our children when we either abuse them or languagely abuse in the presence of them and mistreat them?
Chief, that is that's one that's really dear to me, and as a former kindergarten teacher, you know, and
other children,
all my other children, you know, one of the things that grieves me so badly now is to see a mother, literally, like you just said, just verbally abusing a 3-year-old child in public. You know, sometimes I walk up to the baby and just say, "Hey, beautiful," as they're being abused by their mother. "How are you?" Just to break that, you know, and maybe the mother will say, "Oh, maybe, you know, I shouldn't be doing this." But it has become so, it's so pervasive right now. You know, you see it all the time in the grocery stores and whatever, and that it goes back to, these were things that prior to integration we did not do. There were some things that we just did not do. We still had a grasp on right and wrong. There were some things in us that were just unheard of. There were things that we are doing now as a people that it would have been unheard of 50 years ago for a black person to do. But for whatever reason, we have adopted the really bad habits of other people, and then we've allowed the media to tell us who we are, as opposed to us knowing who we were as children of God, divine creatures on this planet.
Well, you know, the thing really confused me about this whole thing, and I'm going to deal with it a little bit deeper. I don't understand how, well, I want to say a sensible or sane person, but perhaps some of us not sensible and sane. But I don't understand how when you get to be 20, 30, 40, how you expect a child who is 6, 7, and 8, and 10 to be where you are in thought or perception or experience or anything else, because they haven't had it.
Right.
Their little minds are still just growing and developing, you know. So what's your recommendation about what we do? We got to try to fix it.
We do. And and like I said, that's a hard one, because you have had sometimes when the 30 to 40-year-olds have not been taught either. They haven't been parented either. So you've got these generational situations where, you know, for the last 30 years or so, we have just been in a mess as a people, some pockets of our population. And so how we begin to rein that in is one person at a time, one little community at a time, I think. Starting to be courageous enough, first of all, when you see something, you can't just, you have to be wise, because you just can't walk out there and approach everybody.
Well, that's true.
But there are instances where you can make an impact. Just like I said, sometimes I just walk up to a baby in the little carrier in the seat when the mama is acting other than she should be, and just start speaking to the child and praising the child. Simple things like that. Another example I'll give is the young man that I saw in the Walmart parking lot. Beautiful little girl in his arm. He walking into the store with her, and his pants are almost down at his knees. And I said, hey, come, is that your daughter? She is so beautiful. I said, you know, just talking to him. I said, but you know what? When she grows up, she's going to want a man just like her daddy. So her daddy needs to pull his pants up. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. And he pulled them up. I don't know how long they stayed up.
Yeah,
but
he was did what you were supposed to do.
He was approachable. It's
and
how you approach it.
You planted a new idea, or a new thought, a new suggestion in his head.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah. That is something else. Now, another thing that I think we need to address, because it bugs me, is, and that's stereotypical views. You know, there's logic, there's reasoning, and then there's stupidity, and there's abnormal. But now, how do we get our people to second think this stereotypical view? And we ought to be able to do it easy, because white folks stereotyped us for so long, like black people ain't this, black people all lazy, black people are irresponsible. And that just rang wrong, untrue, because all the while they was talking, there were black people creating and inventing and doing all kinds of great things. And now, just like you said, following this indoctrination we got, now we'll go at the police. All the police ain't no good. You know, some black women will say, oh, all men are no good. Men will say, well, I don't care nothing about them because they ain't no good no how. Talking about women. How in the world do we get that stupid state of mind challenged?
When the opportunity presents itself, we present another challenge. There's a young man, I don't know who he was on some show, who was on Facebook talking about the fact that he had to check somebody on his production set that was a driver or something, who made just that statement talking about black women, and he stopped him. He checked him and told him, you're not going to do that in my presence. So when we hear something, we need to say something. If it's, you know, if we don't,
Each
life
one
and limb.
teach one.
Yes. Every time we hear somebody say something that we know isn't true about us, we need to challenge that. You know, it's easy to get the idea if all you've ever heard are those things that you just said, because at some point we started to believe that they were true, and we didn't start to believe that until after, like I said, integration did something to us that we haven't been willing or able to look at carefully enough, to me. Because as long as we were in those self-contained black communities, for the most part we had black teachers who believed in us. They taught us who we were. They showed us a different way of countering those stereotypes that were coming from outside the community. But once integration happened, it seems like we started to believe the lies that were being told. Once we started to mix and mingle with other folk, we started to believe that and internalize that in a different way.
I sit there and look at you as a former teacher, and I think about my teachers, Miss Paris and Miss Ford and Miss Lanier and Miss Means, back when I was in elementary school, and the kinds of things they taught me about reading and writing and being quiet when it was time to be quiet and etc. Now we are faced with a whole new monster. We are faced with a situation where I see little bitty 3 and 4 and 5-year-old children with a little old machine playing games and going through changes. Now, there's not any teaching going on there.
Ooh.
So if I stay invested in these little tricks and games and this television and these stories and all this shooting,
Ooh, you just opened
where do we go?
Ooh, you just opened up a bag of worms, because that technology is, I don't even know how to describe what I think has happened to us, even adults. You know, I go to, sometimes we go out to eat and you got 2 adult people who's supposed to be sharing a meal and a conversation, and both of them are on these devices. You know, and I even have found myself having to be made to put that down. You got a human being here in front of you that you need to be paying attention to. So the addictive qualities of technology and what it does to the neural pathways of a child, to me, it's something that we're not paying nearly enough attention to.
Well, I'm telling you.
Nearly, I mean, children don't know how to communicate with each other. You know, you got teenagers who, when I think about some of the things that some of the children that I've worked with up at Lee County Youth Development Center, some of the stories that they tell about things that have happened to them, and a lot of times, you know, when we talk about this trafficking that happens with our young people, it came from clicking a link on something that they have in their hands, meeting somebody somewhere, and the next thing you know, they're caught up in a situation that they had no anticipation of being caught up in. That technology is really something that I don't know how we unplug from that. I used to tell the last group of young people that I worked with in 21st Century, when we had a meeting, I had a basket, and they would have to put their phones in the basket when they came in. They'd get them when they leave, because it is addictive, and it is hard for them to unplug. And I think a lot of us need to practice pulling back and learning how to hear ourselves think, first of all, and then being able to center ourselves enough to hear the Creator speak through us. Because if you've got all of these voices coming at you all day long, messages and images, and it's just too much. And if you're a child trying to process all of that, it's too much.
That's right. And then when they process, they can't process at all, but they process as much as they can. And then when it comes time for them to hear mama or hear daddy, you can talk to them, and it's like you didn't say anything to them.
That's so true.
You know?
It's so true.
And then, on top of that, when they are faced with a oh my God situation, it's like, where are the critical thinking skills going to be? They can't be there.
That is why we have what we have in Washington. I don't know if you saw that video that was going around. I think it was right after the 2016 election. Anyway, somebody was going on a college campus just holding up pictures of people that college students should recognize when they see them. People like maybe a picture of former presidents, or some people that if they had been students of history in school, they would have recognized.
Right.
They recognized none of these people. But you hold up a picture of Jay-Z or Beyonce, they knew exactly who they were. So this is where, and these were college students. These weren't students that just running amok in the community.
Okay.
But not being able to think critically, not being able to pay attention to what's happening around them in ways that impact them, not having a background of let me give you another critical example. I showed a group of young people the documentary 13 from Ava DuVernay. And they sat and they watched it. And I was surprised, first of all, that it kept their attention. But they had a whole, and these were children who were a part of the juvenile justice system. So they had a whole new understanding of how mass incarceration came to be mass incarceration after watching that. But if you don't have people who are willing to sit down with young people and help them to understand the context of history and how they fit into that, they don't have a clue. They don't have a clue, because we teach history in such disjointed ways that children will tell you that Martin Luther King lived during slavery time, because they don't have the way that we're teaching our young people is they're not getting it for some reason.
Now, we've been all out there talking about that. Who are you?
I am the daughter of Catherine Ray McGowan and Alphonsa McGowan, both of whom hailed from Bullock County, Alabama. I am the great-great-granddaughter of 2 enslaved women who ended up in Bullock County, Alabama. I am the wife of Grover Jackson for the last 46 years.
Lucky joker.
We were high school sweethearts. I am the mother of 2 adult children, a son who is 38 and a daughter who just turned 44 yesterday. I'm the grandmother of 9 girls and 1 boy. I am a community activist. I am an educator, and I am a child of the Most High God.
Tell me about that God. When you think about God, which some people confuse me when they talk about what power they are respecting. What are you talking about?
Well, now you're going to get me on a very long journey, but I'm willing to take that journey with you. Let me start by saying I was born into the Baptist faith. My parents were both Baptists. I was born into the Greenwood Missionary Baptist Church family. I was christened there. I was baptized there. I was married there. My children were christened there and baptized there. And so I've always had a religious background, a religious foundation. So my foundation comes from there. My experience of God, my understanding of God as the creator of this universe has continued to grow and evolve, and it still encompasses that foundation.
But you can't see him doing nothing, so what makes you believe there is a God out there doing anything in the first place? I
am one who believes, there's a scripture that talks about, know you not that the Holy Spirit dwells in you. There's a little piece of God, from my understanding, in each human being.
I agree 100%.
There is a little piece of God.
You took the word out of my mouth next. Go ahead.
So we see God every day. We just don't necessarily recognize what we're looking at. I think that there is, so one analogy that I am fond of is the ocean. The ocean is the allness. If I take a cup and I take a cup of water out of the ocean, everything that's in that cup is in that ocean. The same properties are all there. So we're each little containers of that allness that is God. I think God is manifested in everything, in the flowers, in the trees. You know, God created all of this, so there's a little piece of God in nature. That goes back to what I was saying earlier about how we don't understand. If we look at how indigenous people on this continent revered the earth and worked in harmony with the earth and looked at the patterns of nature and lived in harmony with that, we wouldn't be having these issues that we're talking about if we understood that this is all a part of an interconnectedness of God. So to me, God is much bigger than any one religion, any one path, any one. I don't think, you know, I think God is so much bigger than what our human minds can conceive of, and we like to label things and compartmentalize things, and then, you know, so I have gotten to the point where I try not to do that with God. I try to understand that God is expansive, God is inclusive, God is love, and I don't think that God gets overly concerned with what we decide we want to label God as, because God is bigger than all of that we can conceive of as human beings.
Well, what happens when he lets you get sick? Do you curse him, or do
you know, and I think
denounce him?
No,
or?
and I'm going to get myself into a little bit of probably trouble here, but that's okay if I'm willing to take that risk. You know, sometimes we think about God as this puppeteer who's orchestrating things from somewhere up on some mountain somewhere and causing things to happen. I don't necessarily believe that. So I believe that things happen because, first of all, we are in these human bodies, and things happen to human bodies. A lot of it we bring on ourselves because we don't do the things that we know we ought to do to take care of these vessels that we were blessed with. And then we blame, some of us blame God. I don't think God sits and decides, well, let me give this person that, and then I'm going to give this. I don't think God operates that way. I think that God is an entity that has put in place spiritual laws. I think people can violate them and create consequences for themselves as a result of that. But I don't see God as a puppet master doing things to people.
What about when he takes somebody away from you, like your mother, your father, your sister, your
And
brother?
I have had that, and that's a part of what I call the circle of life. So death is a part of that transitional phase that we all are going to go through at some point
what I think.
or another. And so, of course, we grieve, and we, you know, it's a loss, and so we're human, we grieve that. But I try to look at it as, like I said, a part of that circle of life.
So what do you do every day?
What do I... Right now, I am doing as little as possible.
But that's a lot.
That's a lot. I've just recently taken a retirement. Since I am fully Social Security eligible now, I decided I would do that.
You've already done it, or you?
I am in the process of formalizing that.
Well, that's
and
time,
so,
yeah. Okay.
So, you know, I'm looking at, I do a lot of writing, so I'm trying to bring some of that writing to a place where I can maybe do something with it. Spending a lot more time, like I was able yesterday, to go up and spend the day with my daughter. It was her birthday, and it was a Friday, and I was glad I was able to do that.
And all those grandchildren?
And no, we didn't take all of them with us. We took her to dinner. We took her to dinner, her daddy and I did. And then we came back and had cake and ice cream with the grandbabies.
Okay.
But yeah, so that, you know, I look around, Chief, and there are a lot of good things happening in this community, and I think our community as a whole, and let me just stop here and say to you, thank you, because I know that a lot of the energy, a lot of this resurgence of creative energy that I'm seeing right now, and restoring energy and revitalizing energy and people working together in groups, I don't think a lot of that would have been possible without you and the work that you have done consistently in this community to raise the level of consciousness, to be a consistent voice for right. And so I just want to take this opportunity, since you got me here talking, to say thank you. You're welcome. But yeah, so, you know, I'm involved with a couple of groups right now, still with Alabama New South. Excited about TM46, which I know that is a spin-off of a brainchild of yours. So again, thank you. There's a lot of good energy being created there, a lot of intergenerational energy.
Absolutely.
Which is something that I am just so excited about, because the only way that this community is going to grow is if we can attract young people especially the university young people who are interested in creating change in this community.
That's right. And getting prepared to get out of their way.
Yeah,
so
that's true. That's something that we don't do very well, but we're learning, and
right.
They are being patient with us and we with them. So I'm excited about what's happening in the community right now.
So where do you see the community going? We've struggled. I've been here for 20 years now. And I have prayed, talked, produced, and everything else. And I think I sense now an avenue for growth and development and rise. Do you see the same thing?
Absolutely, I do. I call it Renaissance energy. I think that we are on an ascension path right now. And it's because of seeds that have been planted by people like you and others in the community. And so sometimes you plant a seed, it might be a long time before you see something sprout up. But I think that's the energy and the period of time that we're in right now. We're seeing some of the results of some of those seeds that have been planted. And I'm excited. I think we're on a path of, first of all, we're beginning to talk to each other more. That's one thing that I'm noticing.
You're absolutely
people
correct.
that, would not have been in the same room. One of the things I think we have done in this community is try to operate in these little silos. And everybody is, this is my little thing over here. But until you get everybody in the same room and begin to hear some of those things, and so I think that's happening a lot more, and I can't help but think that we are on a path of growth right now.
Well, you're exactly right, because I know back in the day, I had a lady suggest that my head should be severed, and it should be put on a platter.
Wow.
And it should be sent to Iraq.
Wow.
To be dealt with. That same lady here, let's say 19 years later, I walked in the restaurant one day and they had a long line, but it was her church. She called me at the door and said, "You get in the front of this line because you don't want to get behind all these people." I said, "No ma'am, I'm not bucking that line." She said, "Oh no, come on, go with me." She stepped out of the line, took me by my hand, took me to the front of the line, and I'm surprised I didn't faint.
Wow.
Because I sensed in that gesture, in that situation, that you handled a hateful situation with love. And though it took this long for it to go around and come around, you were the winner of that situation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I thought about what would have happened if I had been crazy enough or hateful enough or stupid enough, to engage in combat with her all of these years.
Right.
Right. And how ignorant I would have been, and how unfortunate I would have been, because love developed from it, because she demonstrated that expression of love that day.
Awesome. That's a prime example of what we've got to do with people. And one of the things that I have learned in dealing with human beings over the years, that sometimes the most hurtful people, the people that do the most harm, are the most wounded. Hurt people. And so we are a people that collectively we experience a lot of trauma and hurt, and individually people have experienced things. And so when you see somebody acting other than themselves, my position is to step back and say, wow, they must be in some kind of emotional pain. Otherwise, they wouldn't be acting like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what is my role in dealing with that? So what you just said about this woman brings that back to me. That's how I try to deal with people as well. Because it doesn't make sense to take somebody who is obviously in a lot of emotional pain and just throw salt in that with your whatever it is that you bring to the table.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that same thing was to help me stop hating my father. Because he used to be abusive to my mother. And when I was 1, 2, 3, and I left them at 4 and went to my grandparents. Well, my father happened to have been killed at 10 years when I was 10 years old. So that bitter taste of him being vicious to my mother stuck with me. You know, but I went on to hate him for many years, went into the Air Force, you know, and found myself in, well, I guess I started in high school and on into the Air Force. And when by the time I was discharged, I started processing some kind of assessment of why I hated that man so much, you know, and asking myself, did it make sense? Well, what I came to understand is what you just articulated. This man, I never walked in his shoes.
There you go.
He was working in the coal mines of Birmingham, Alabama. I'm sure in that coal mine, he got the dirtiest assignments, he got the less pay, and so he, by the time he got home, if my mother would say good evening to him, hell, he may be in the attitude to say, what's so darn good about it, you know? So you are exactly right. His hurt transferred to our house.
Absolutely.
He took it out on my mama. As a child, I witnessed it and didn't have the capacity to discern why it was happening, you know. So I would like to really urge young people out there, you know, to pay attention to this thing that we are saying.
Absolutely. It's
about
critical.
how critical it is to not be hateful and not be vindictive, not want to fight and shoot somebody every time they cross you or say something you don't like or look at you sideways, you know. So
yeah, and that's a part of that inner. That's one of the things that a rites of passage program would begin to teach young people, how to channel those emotions, how to process interpersonal relationships and those kinds of things. So yeah, I'm glad you were able to do that, because some people carry that kind of stuff to their graves. They never get to the point where they can process it like you did.
And my pastor says some people hate people 25 years after they're dead. Oh,
absolutely. I got some folks like that in my own family. I know some of those people. I do.
All right, now tell me this. Are you going to know what to do with retirement once you come from under that? What I want to call it? slave day or whatever.
There you go. So let me tell you this. I'm gonna when my mother, who worked 36 years at the Veterans Hospital, retired, I can remember telling her, "Ooh, Mama, I wouldn't work for nobody 36 years." I can hear myself saying that to her as clear as today. I count 25 years in the kindergarten classroom. Count 2 years in daycare, and then add 14 more years on that at Lee County Youth Development Center, and you will see that I lied to my mama, because I have worked 36 plus years. So to answer your question, I'm going to take it easy for just long enough to chart a good course for myself.
Well, that would be good, because you can't bow out because you got too much to give. And there's no sense of me even assuming that you are going to. I told myself I was going, and I haven't sit down since.
Well, yeah. I'm going to sit down for just a little while, just long enough to get some clarity about next steps.
All right. Okay, then. Well, I tell you, I sure do enjoy talking to you, and we won't make it 10 years again.
Absolutely.
Before we come back.
Absolutely.
All
Thank you.
right.